Okay, so this is the fourth time I'm shooting this video. The first time I felt like was too long. The first couple times I felt like were too long, and I really didn't want to do a play-by-play of this movie. And then the other two, one was dark, and then the other one was just did not come out right. So I am doing it again, and this will be the final time. So however it comes out is how it comes out. And I feel like a lot of people avoid this by writing scripts and setting up beforehand, but you know, I'm a renegade, so here I am. Basically, I just watched this movie, and it's called Fair Play. It's still on Netflix. It was directed by Chloe Dumont, and it stars Phoebe Dynevor from Bridgerton and Alden Ehrenreich, who incidentally is in Supernatural, apparently, and I'm binging that right now, so I thought that was really cool. I just watched it, and I did not realize, like, it was in the thriller section, and when I watched it, it was close to Halloween. So I assumed that, I didn't think it was going to be a horror movie, but I thought that there was going to be some kind of, maybe international intrigue, maybe like they would attack each other, like physically or something. I just kept waiting, like, for the thrill to start. And I think that if I had known what type of movie this was, I think that I would have had a different opinion of it. It's just one of those things where my expectations were so different based off of the fact that they said it was a thriller. So just so you know, if you're looking for like a thriller, this movie is actually about the deterioration of this woman's relationship. So Phoebe plays Emily, and her boyfriend is Luke, who's played by Alden Ehrenreich. And they're a happy couple. They're not supposed to be dating because they work for this finance company, and you're not supposed to be dating your coworkers. But they're dating and they're going to get married. He proposes and she says yes. And so from that point, everything is going fine until there's a promotion at their job. And at that point, Phoebe is listening to, or Emily rather, is listening to all of this gossip around the office. And she thinks to herself, oh, like, they're saying that maybe Luke has a chance. So I think Luke got it. So she goes and she tells her boyfriend, you got this promotion. And it turns out he didn't. And from there, it's just downhill the rest of the movie as far as their relationship. So it turns out they did not want Luke for the role. They wanted her. And so, unfortunately, Luke has a really hard time accepting this, and you could tell from the way that he's supportive, but not very supportive. He's just being very fake. So he tells her, "Oh, wow, that's great. That's a great achievement," or whatever. But he also asks her if the boss tried anything with her, because I guess in his mind, he's thinking she couldn't have gotten this promotion over me. And incidentally, it's the same thing that all of her coworkers think about her too. Even though she has like a really good track record for the work that she does. So what struck me the most about this movie was just all of the relationships in the movie are bad for this lady. So she has like her boyfriend who starts nagging her after she gets this promotion. He makes fun of her clothes and says that they're not going to take her seriously because she's too available for them. Just all of this stuff. So like that relationship is terrible. And then her mom, who just seems overbearing. You never really see her mom except like towards the end when they do this engagement party. That's just, it's a very ill-fated event. But from the phone calls, you can already tell that her mother is very overbearing. Like as soon as they get engaged, she says, please don't tell anybody yet, because we actually are not supposed to be dating at the job and all this other stuff. And so her mom proceeds to tell everyone in their town and then starts planning an engagement party without telling her, and just all of this stuff that she just does on her own and expects Emily to be grateful because, she's making this effort, but it's like, thanks for nothing. I didn't want you to do it in the first place. So she has that relationship with her mom, which is terrible. And then her boss is awful, simply because he's a cold person. He's very results oriented, which I guess just, might fit in well with that field. But he also calls her a name, which actually made me laugh out loud. Like there were some points in this movie where they startled me and made me laugh. But yeah, so he calls her a name when she messes up on the job and stuff. So he's awful. So basically it made me think about relationships, and towards the end, it was like it became physical, and then became like an assault and all that stuff with her and her boyfriend. So it just got worse and worse, and there was nobody there who was really a solid relationship for her. And the movie didn't like include any friends or anything like that, so you couldn't really see if there was like somebody that she could rely on, or you also didn't know kind of where they were coming from or how they were as people just outside of their relationship or outside of their jobs, which might be on purpose because maybe like the job and then that relationship was pretty much all consuming, so you really didn't get to see any other sides of them. But it really made me think about toxicity in relationships. And when I finished the movie, that's what stuck with me. It's a good movie. It's got a lot of great themes as far as, women breaking into male dominated fields, relationships, toxic relationships, um, being, I guess, like maybe not emotionally available, but I guess like men feeling fragile, like fragile male feelings. I don't know how to put that. Um, Feeling insecure in relationships because of the money dynamic, which they consider maybe like, or some people might consider like a power imbalance. So after I finished this movie, I was thinking a lot about relationships, and not just the romantic kind, but also family relationships, friendships, all of the types of relationships that we have throughout our lives. And, toxicity and how do we deal with problems and all of those things. And so I reached out to a relationship therapist to ask her all of my questions, as well as some listener questions too that I gathered. And we had an interview, so stay tuned for the interview.
To introduce myself, my name is Nicole Walker, and I am a licensed counselor and coach. And I specialize in helping people get out of their own way of finding and keeping that healthy, secure love that we all crave and deserve. So that is kind of my mission. I've been a licensed therapist for over 10 years. And I am based in upstate New York with my husband and my two pups, and we're expecting a baby next month.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So you've been a therapist for a while. Did you start out with marriages and relationships, or did you start out just in general therapy?
I did not. It's funny. A lot of my background is in substance abuse and what we would call like SMI, severe mental illness. And I never wanted to work with couples or do relationships, but I think it was because it was just like so close to me and something that I was personally struggling with, that I was like, yeah, I just don't want to, touch that with a 10-foot pole. But once I really started working on that in my own life in my late 20s, I think that is when the shift began. And I just saw that through the work that I was doing on, my own individual journey, was really helping me kind of cultivate the relationships that I wanted. I was like, you know what? Like, I wonder, like, I feel like I could help other people with this. And when I started talking about it on my Instagram and sharing more content, kind of under that umbrella, it seemed to really resonate with people. So I would say over the past like 4 years, I've kind of moved in that direction and really enjoyed it.
It's amazing because having a relationship is it's such a big part of our lives. Finding a partner and somebody who, will care for us and we can care for them, it's just such a big deal. So it's amazing. You help make happy couples.
I try my darndest. It is not easy. It's work day in and day out, but I
Right.
think we can all get there.
Well, I was reading on your website, you work with attachment styles.
Yes,
Can you
yeah.
talk a
So
little bit
that's
about that?
really my, I would say, specialty is, working from like an informed attachment theory perspective, which really helped me and I found has really helped my clients. So, attachment theory is a school of research founded by John Bowlby in the 1950s, who is a British psychologist, and it's kind of been expanded upon since then. But it's this, school of thought that the attachments that we form in childhood with our caregivers, in these formative relationships really impact the relationships that we're able to create and maintain with others as adults. So I think it gives people a really helpful paradigm to kind of understand why they're showing up in relationships the way they are, and also to kind of look at our dating and relationship struggles through a lens of self-compassion to realize like, oh, wait, wow, there is a reason that like I'm doing XYZ and I'm not just like horrible at dating or horrible at relationships or self-sabotaging. There's like a reason behind these behaviors, which I think can be really helpful for people.
Right. It's empowering.
Yes.
Right. That's really interesting. So can you change attachment styles? Like once you figure out what's going on, like, oh, I'm like this because of this. Now I want to date someone. Could you change it, or do you just kind of work within that boundary? If that
You
makes
can totally change your attachment style. They are plastic. So, the research out now kind of suggests that about 50% of us have a secure attachment style, which is what we kind of all want and strive for, because these individuals' relationships are pretty easy for them. They're able to receive and give love with ease. And then the other 50% of the population kind of falls under this umbrella of having an insecure attachment style, which includes avoidant, anxious, and disorganized. So for those grouping of people, through work and therapy and introspection, you can totally move to a more secure place. And a big part of that too, if you're in relationship or actively dating, being mindful of who you're choosing to be in partnership with, because just by being in partnership with someone secure, that can really help you move to a more secure place. And not saying that two insecurely attached individuals can't move to, a secure place together, but that's all to say that they can be changed.
Couples be toxic and then also still seek to repair their relationship, or do you not really see a lot of toxic couples come in for therapy? Is it the nature of the relationship, it just can't be improved upon, or
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I would say that most people who come into therapy are already in the toxic stage.
oh
I would really encourage people to come in earlier. I feel like a lot of couples make the mistake of like, oh, I'm not going to go to couples therapy until like this, things get really, really bad and like it's a last resort. And it can be so helpful to take a more proactive approach, in your relationship to kind of like mitigate that conflict so it doesn't get to like this really toxic place. But I think that, there's definitely like a spectrum there. Because I think that individuals that have, toxic dynamics in their relationships, we can totally work through that. We can totally find new strategies and like come back together and change things. Like nothing is something that we can't work on, right? Like, even in infidelity, like so many couples work past those kind of things. But I think that for each individual, there is like that fine line, right? Where it's like, okay, like I feel like I can work on this, or this person has breached my feeling of safety in the relationship, or has crossed a deal breaker for me personally that I just feel like I cannot come back from. Like, this thing that occurred, like that was, it for me. So I think it's really more of like an individual process to determine, all right, is there still a part of me that feels motivated to work on this relationship and see if we can better it together? Or do I really feel that like the version of myself that I am at this point in this relationship, and given what's transpired, like I can't move past it? That's an individual choice to make. Two other things I'll bring up to keep in mind is like, let's say you are in a toxic place with your partner and you're like, okay, let's work on this. it's going to be a gazillion times easier if you both want to put in that work to change, right? Like if you both have that growth mindset, you're like, hey, let's work on this together. Like we both want to be in this relationship. Like
Right.
that's just something to keep in mind because that's a very different situation than if your partner is like, I'm not the problem. You're 100% the problem. I don't have to change anything. I'm
Right.
not going to therapy. I'm not reading the books. Like this is all on you. So
Right.
again, not that we can't enact change from that place, but that's a very different situation than if you're both able to sit in that place, both take some ownership and acknowledge, like, ooh, we don't like where we're at, and we both want to put in the work, to better this. And the other thing that I'll say too is I think it can be really helpful to do some introspection around, like, okay, like if you have one of those insecure attachment styles that I was talking about earlier, if you never had any healthy role models of love growing up, you're probably going to be attracted to people that are a little toxic or aren't super healthy for you, right? Because it's what you're used to. It's what our subconscious is going to be attracted to because it feels familiar, and our subconscious attributes familiarity with safety, right? So that's a completely different situation, right? And something to look at of like, I just picked a really bad partner for me, right? Who's going to like trigger and exacerbate
Right.
like all my stuff. That's a very different situation than, you know what, like I picked a partner that I genuinely love, who I think is a good person, who's kind, who's honest, whatever those traits are that are really important to you. And we've just hit this rough patch,
Right.
or stuff's coming up for me, or life events, or whatever it is that like we got to work through together. Those are like
Right.
two very different situations that I
Right.
think are important to kind of ascertain like which boat you fall into.
That's a really good distinction to make. And I remember having a conversation with a friend years ago, and we were like, why do we pick the people that we do? Because, like you said, you pick these people unconsciously or subconsciously. And then I was reading a self help book, and it was saying, why don't you write down the qualities of all of your past relationships and see what the similarities are? And then once you start doing that, you start to see the pattern. It's like, but why would I choose that?
Right.
Yeah, it's just really interesting how the human brain works and how, these relationships continue to happen.
I know, it's wild. And a lot of times, those are the people that we're going to be like really attracted to and are going to have those like really intense connections with from the jump. But it's like, this other rational side of your brain is like, this person is not good for me. It's like so confusing to like, rectify, like, oh, I'm really attracted to them, but like, they're not good for me and I shouldn't be with them.
It's interesting. But what's the difference between, because I hear this a lot on social media, everybody's a narcissist. So they'll be like,
Oh,
my mom's a narcissist, my boyfriend's a narcissist, my girlfriend's a narcissist. And so I'm wondering what's the difference between, and what is a narcissist exactly? And what's the difference between a narcissist and just somebody who's just not, like you said, not good for you?
yes, I am so passionate about this, Janae, because I think that there is so much misinformation out there about narcissism. And I think that there's a lot of like fear mongering as
Yeah.
well. And, what I mean by that is like, yeah, I just feel like there's this sense of fear of like, everyone's a narcissist, beware, like, oh, and it's like, what are we doing here? Okay. Like, if you educate yourself and you're dating someone and you're like, this seems odd,
Yeah.
like stop talking to them. Like it's
Yeah.
really not as complicated, I
Yeah.
feel like, as people make it out to be. Unless you're, really deep in a relationship with someone who, then that's another story. But I guess the first thing I want to say on that topic is that to say that someone's a narcissist, there's a spectrum, right? And, narcissistic personality disorder, what we would call NPD, right? Which is in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is what we use to diagnose people. That is so freaking rare to have that personality disorder. I think the statistic is like 1 to 3% of the population has true NPD. So I want to start out by saying that to just like, this idea that there's all these narcissists like
Just
running
hanging around.
around is not true. Okay. And I think there's also a spectrum of narcissism. Someone can have a couple like narcissistic traits, but not meet the full criteria for NPD.
Mhm.
So, we just want to have a little more flexibility with the way that we look at that. And to define narcissism, so, the way that I look at narcissism is a personality disorder is something that is created and, born from circumstance. So compared to some of these other mental health disorders that could be genetic or that you're born with, no one's born a narcissist. That is something that
Wow.
is created over time from that individual's childhood or circumstances. So usually, narcissism is a product of an environment where that individual's sense of empathy for others has to shrink as a way to survive, right? So if that individual is in a situation where it could just be very volatile or toxic, or the complete opposite end of the spectrum, they have this like helicopter super like overbearing parent, right? That person feels like, to survive, I can't think of other people and I have to solely focus on myself, right? So
Mhm.
it's kind of like this protective mechanism. And narcissism at its core, you're not able to have this sense of um self-esteem like within yourself, and you can only get it from other people. So if we can look at this through like a lens of empathy for a quick second, right? Like think about how crappy that would feel, like day in and day out, that you never feel okay with yourself and you only can like get that boost if you constantly need that external affirmation and feedback from other people,
Mhm.
right? So narcissism at its core is, a lack of empathy for other people. They need that external validation, so there's a lot of talk about like narcissistic supply. That's what we're
Wow.
talking about, right? Like
Okay.
needing that from others.
Well, that's interesting that you say that because whenever I would picture a narcissist, I would think, oh, this must be a person who grew up with parents who were really mean or like neglect or abuse type thing. But then, like you're saying, it can also be from helicopter parenting and like constant. I guess they don't feel able to stand on their own and have, like you said, that esteem in themselves, be like, I'm capable of doing things and making decisions and lighting my own flame type thing.
Right,
That's
exactly.
really
Because in that instance of having like this really overbearing parent, the individual feels like they have to constantly fight for their own sense of identity because someone's constantly,
right.
coming in their space and doing things for them or telling them what to think or feel or, all those things. So that can definitely kind of be a product of it too. And I think, another differentiating factor between like a quote unquote bad partner and a narcissist is like a narcissist, you're going to have that pattern of very hot and cold behavior, right? So they're going to like come in with the love bombing, tell you everything you ever wanted to hear, shower you with gifts and praise, and then they're going to disappear, and then they're going to come back, and then they're going to like disappear, so we see this period of love bombing followed by what we would call like the devaluing and discard phase. And then they come back and draw you back in with the love bombing. And then they devalue and discard you, where I think that can be a difference where with a bad partner, like maybe you just got a bad partner, and that person's
Yeah.
pretty consistently bad.
Yeah.
So that can be a big difference too.
So they come back in for, I guess, the validation, and then they leave. Just like, did they need like the highs and lows, or
Yes, they
so
need
then
the
they like
highs
give
and
off and come
lows.
back?
Yes,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
they're not, a narcissist is kind of out in the world interacting with others like with a 3-foot barrier in front of them, like
Right.
almost like a shield. So it's really hard for them to form kind of those genuine connections with other people because they're always operating from such a self-protecting place,
Mm.
right? So, the love bombing is like, I'm going to tell you everything you want to hear. So then I get reflected back to me, all this love and praise and,
Right.
admiration. But then, it hits this tipping point where it's like, well, I need to feel really powerful and strong and good about myself. So I'm going to make you feel bad about yourself to make me feel better. And then we go back, and then it's like,
Yeah.
the ego game of like, well, I'm going to now bring you back into my circle. And you can just kind of get on this hamster wheel.
So how do you handle toxic relationships that are not just romantic relationships? What about family relationships, people you have to see? And we're coming up on Thanksgiving pretty soon, so I'm sure we'll be seeing a lot of different family members. How do you handle toxic family members? They may not, like you said, be narcissists, but they might have toxic behavior. What do you do, especially if you have to interact with them on a frequent basis?
Yes, this is a great question. Definitely good to explore this before the holidays, have a game. But my way to approach this is I have an acronym DALE, DALE. This will help you navigate toxic family members around the holidays. And a lot of what I'm about to share too is informed by this phenomenal book. I've recommended it to so many clients, and it's called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents by Lindsay Gibson. And the strategies in the book, I mean, I know in the title is parents, but it can really be applied to any family members. And I think hits a wide array of, toxic family members, whatever that could look like. But I think that number one is to kind of have some loving detachment with this individual, a little bit of distance, right? We don't need to be um constantly kind of in that purple person circle, right? If they're really toxic. So having those boundaries around your space and your personal boundaries, I think is really important. And then the second one, A, is acceptance, because I think that, I always approach therapy and coaching through a lens of like, how can we limit any amount of suffering that you have to go through, right? We want to experience the least amount of suffering. And I think that so many people get into that trap with toxic family members of thinking, oh, this time it'll be different. Maybe this time
Right.
so-and-so
Yeah.
won't do this or did it. And they hold out hope. And then there's all this frustration and resentment and anger attached to when it doesn't go the way that they hoped that it would go. And it's like, you know what? If you just accept people for who they are and you go into it thinking like, I know that Aunt Sue's going to do X, Y, Z,
Mhm.
like you're not going to have those feelings. And you
Right.
know what? If they don't, then a happy surprise for you. That's great. We
Right.
love that, right? But I think that that is so important, accepting people for who they are. And I also think that that can be such a point of conflict for people because a lot of people who are emotionally immature just don't have the emotional maturity, don't have those skills to be who you want them to be, right? And there's a very big difference between can't and won't. So, us kind of going to, let's say our mom, mom, why can't you, blah, 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 blah. Well, maybe that person genuinely like can't be that. And think
Right.
of what a point of friction that is, that you're constantly mad at them for not being able to show up in your life the way you want them to, instead of accepting what they can give you. Does that
Exactly.
make
Yeah,
sense?
that makes sense.
And then the other two we can quickly go through are L, kind of goes with acceptance, but lowering your expectations,
Yeah.
right? So, really going into it with kind of this self-preservation lens of like, all right, I'm not expecting this to go great. What can I do to kind of manage my expectations and set myself up for success in this situation? And that can really look like too around the holidays, like having a game plan. Like you don't want to be stuck at some family function, like 3 glasses of wine in with no ride
Right.
home,
Yeah.
stuck in the corner with like Uncle Frank,
Yeah.
who's like talking politics. Like that's not fun for anyone. So, does that look like bringing a friend? Does it look like driving yourself instead of driving with other family members? Does it look like, meeting someone somewhere instead of having them come to your house? So it's more time limited. Like
Right.
just thinking kind of those things through, I think are really important. And then I think the last tip, E, is trying to navigate these situations with empathy. Because if we can look at these toxic individuals with some empathy, which, yes, is very hard, but it doesn't change the external situation, but it does change our internal experience of it, right? And if we can think of it through this lens of these toxic individuals, like they're walking around in the world this way day in and day out. It's probably hard for them to make friends. They're
Yeah.
pissing people off. They're burning bridges.
Yeah.
Like, just be happy that you're not them and that you can form your own kind of loving but detached relationship with them with boundaries.
And that way you don't internalize it too and just say, it's me, I'm a bad person because that's why they react that way to me, you know?
Yes, no, that depersonalization piece is
Right.
so key because if people are like that, they're going to be like that with everyone. It's
Across
not
the
just
board.
you.
Yeah. Well, how do you set appropriate boundaries? I guess you talked about that a little bit as far as, maybe I'll go to the family dinner, but I'll leave a little bit early, or I won't engage with them in the same ways. But are there any other ways that you set appropriate boundaries with overbearing family members, friends, things like that, situations like that?
Yeah, I think my biggest tip that I would give people is to understand and remember the difference between boundaries and expectations. Because I think a lot of people get in the trap of thinking, like, oh, I set the boundary and now I'm done. No, we got to set the boundary and then we got to hold the boundary, right? Which can be like the most difficult
Yeah,
part.
that's the challenge.
Yes, and I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking like, "Oh, my boundary is that I told my mom that we're not going to talk about my weight." I don't know, random example, right?
Mhm.
Well, your boundary can't be dependent on hoping someone else does XYZ, right? A boundary, that's an expectation. A boundary is something that is a self-protective strategy that you have control over, right? So the boundary in that situation would look like, okay, if mom starts talking about my weight, I'm going to say, "Mom, we talked about this," right? You could start out gently. If she doesn't respond to that, you could say, "All right, you know what? This conversation is over. I told you I'm not going to talk about my weight." And you either walk away, or if you're on the phone, you hang up, right? It's always looking at these boundaries through the lens of like, what's in my control? What action steps can I take to keep myself safe? And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the game plan, right? It's
Mhm.
not like, before the dinner, let's say, I don't know, your brother has an alcohol problem and you're like, "All right, Johnny, don't drink too much at Thanksgiving." You can't bank on that,
Right. Yeah.
right? Like, you need to go and have a game plan of like, all right, if my brother, drinks way too much and I feel really uncomfortable, what am I going to do to
Right.
navigate that? I
Because you
can't
can't control what
expect.
other people do. Right.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly.
Well, I do have some questions. This is a slight transition, but I have some listener questions that
Okay.
I got before this show. But they're asking, how did you get started as a relationship expert? What is your history like? Well, we've already spoken of how you about how you got started. What is your history like? Did you grow up with both parents? And how do you think our upbringing impacts our future relationships?
I did grow up with both parents, but I did have kind of a unique situation in that my parents divorced or separated, which ultimately led to divorce when I was about 30 years old. And some stuff came up then. That was definitely, difficult for me to navigate. So it was kind of a situation where, I grew up with these two individuals where it always just like felt like something was off. And I had that personal experience of when they did get divorced. I was like, okay, this like makes more sense to me. Like these, two individuals just didn't really seem like a good match. So that was a interesting experience to navigate divorce, as an adult child, and
Right,
kind of,
right.
what that looked like. So given that, what I just shared, I didn't grow up with the healthiest role models of love and relationships. So it was really hard for me to kind of, and this is kind of what I help other people with, is like, all right, if you don't have this blueprint of what you want, you feel like you're starting at square zero, like that can feel so overwhelming to be like, okay, like, what is a healthy relationship?
Yeah.
What does that look like? Like, how do I find that? All of those things. So that was a journey that I individually had to go on. And that's kind of how I started helping other people do the same thing. Because most of us do want to be in, healthy, secure,
Right.
happy
Yeah.
relationships.
And the good part about what you're saying is that nothing is written in stone just because maybe you
Right.
grew up in a household where your parents fought all the time or you had, something go on that you can go on to have healthy relationships. So, um, I think that's really empowering. So, how do you know? This is the second question. How do you know if your partner is the one?
You don't. That is the answer to that question. You are never going to know your partner is the one.
A light goes on. It's like, that's the one.
Yes, no, that does not happen. Maybe that happens in the movies. Maybe that happens for a very small subset of us. But I think that, there's this big part of relational work, helping people mitigate like relationship anxiety, or what we would call relationship ambivalence. And what that means is, these individuals who are in relationships, but always just kind of feel like they're questioning it, or is this the right person for me? And, all those things. And I think that's so normal. And people make the mistake of thinking like, oh, if I'm questioning it, like, that means this person is bad for me and I need to get out. It could mean that, or it could mean that, is you're kind of increasing the levels of permanence in your relationship with this person. It's triggering your attachment wounds and
Right.
bringing up your stuff. And that's a whole other thing, right? We can totally work through that
Yeah.
and navigate it. But I think that a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, oh, I'm going to find the perfect person, and then it's going to be rainbows and roses
Right.
from here on out. And it's like,
Right.
no, 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 no. You got to like find someone who you think is a decent human being, and you're attracted to them, and you guys have a good time together, and build something from there. Like I love to use that metaphor of like, if you're looking for a house, I think like a lot of people are looking for like the shiny brand new, like stickers aren't even off the windows yet, and it's like, all
Right.
right, we're all ready to go, versus like, I found this like really really solid plot of land, and I'm going to build like this house that I
Right.
love, like with this person over time, that has a solid foundation. I hope that difference makes sense.
No, it definitely does. And the funny thing too is sometimes when people find the shiny person, that might not even work out.
Right, totally. Yeah, because I think that like how quote unquote real or like
Yeah.
sustainable is that for someone to be,
Right.
perfect all the time in a
Idealized
relationship.
person. Right.
Exactly.
Okay, so the third question is, what is your view on non-monogamous relationships such as polyamory? Can those be successful?
Yes, I think those can definitely be successful. I am not an expert by no means on polyamory, but I can speak from my experience working with some individuals in that space, where I feel like those relationships are most successful when everyone is on the same page and there's a lot of communication around what is going on. In my clinical and coaching experience, where people get into trouble, and what I see a lot is that one person feels really good about this polyamory or non-monogamous aspect of their relationship, and the other person doesn't, but they're like trying to appease the other person,
Right.
or they're trying to make them happy, or they think like, oh, I'll try it out and see how it goes, but it like just doesn't really sit well with them.
Right.
So that's where I see like those friction points, is like people just aren't on the same page with it. So for those types of relationships to be successful, you really got to like both be on the same page.
Right. And then you have a third person, like you said, to work on communication with.
Right,
Like an
right,
added challenge. Yeah.
which can be difficult. So it's not for the faint of heart, those
Yeah.
relationships, because the more people you bring in,
Right.
the pot there, it can be difficult. Not saying it can't be done. It's
Right.
just like
Right.
you
Right.
really got to be on top of your communication and make sure everyone's on the same page.
So, question four, they asked, how do you find people to date and how can you improve your chances of attracting a good partner?
Okay, this is a great question. To answer the second part of that first, I think you attract a good partner by first becoming the type of partner that you want to attract. Right? So if you're out there and you're like, I want someone who's a good communicator and who's emotionally mature and, talks about how they feel. Okay, well, are you doing those things? Right? I'm not saying we like are trying to find the version of us, like, and someone who's exactly like us, but just that we're able to bring to the table those secure qualities that we're looking for in someone else, I think is really important. And how you meet people um, is, I mean, of course, the dating apps are great, but the dating apps aren't for everyone. I know a lot of my clients are like, I'm done with this. I've sworn them off, which is fine. That's like your own individual choice.
Right.
But I think if you're going to do that, a lot of my clients have found success by just getting out there and meeting new people, right? So joining groups in their community, joining like adult sports leagues, like running clubs, joining a book club. I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking, like, let's say I'm a single woman attracted to men, right? Like, I gotta like be at the golf course around these like guys, right? Like you get so hyper focused on like I gotta like expand my circle to like meet single men. But I think a lot of us miss such great opportunities where it's like, okay, well, if we, yeah, that's good, also we can just try and expand our social circle in general, because let's say you join a running club and you make 5 new girlfriends.
Yeah.
Okay, well, those 5 new girlfriends could have a single brother or a single friend or a great guy they know at work who's single,
Yeah.
right? Like telling people like, hey, I'm open, like if you know of anyone, like I'm willing to be set up. Like I think that can be a great way to meet new people and find new people, is just expanding your social support network in general. And as you do that, be really open and forthcoming that you're looking to be in a relationship. And if anyone knows of anyone, like you're down to be set up.
So, how do you pick up on early red flags?
I think you pick up on early red flags by listening to your gut, right? There's this quote I love by Anne Enright saying that people do not change, they are merely revealed. And how I interpret that quote is I think a lot of people, they get to 6 months into a relationship, a year into a relationship, and they're like, I don't know where this person came from. Like, I don't even recognize them. They
Mhm.
completely changed. And it's like, but did they? Or were there things like, in the beginning of the relationship that you just kind of dismissed or glossed over or thought like, oh, that's only a one-time thing, and not that everyone can't have a slip up, or show a side of their character they don't like, once in a blue moon, but like they're 99% of the time with, these like toxic components, they're in red flags, they're gonna show up in different ways in those early stages. And it's really on you to listen to them, to acknowledge them, right? It's like, that expression, like people show you who you are, you
Right.
have to believe them. So
Right.
that would kind of be my answer to that question.
So, if you have one of those relationships and then you get out of that relationship, how do you recover from the relationship and come out stronger? That's the
Um,
last question, actually.
yeah, no, I think you do that by having a lot of kindness and compassion with yourself in that process. I think no one got anywhere faster by like beating themselves up, right? And I think we can all make mistakes in relationships. We can all end up in a relationship or a situation, and it's like, what happened there? You know, like I feel like I lost myself or whatever, or that wasn't like me. And like, that's okay, right? Like, how can we walk away with a lot of kindness and forgiveness towards ourselves and start to rebuild that solid foundation of security and love within ourselves, and also be open to reflecting on what we can take away from that experience and what we can learn, right? Because with dating and relationships, like every experience that you have is just getting you that much closer to that kind of bond that you want with someone,
Right.
right? So I
Right.
think that can be like a helpful and hopeful way to look at these things of like, yeah, that was a really crappy situation, but like now I feel so much more convicted in what I want and don't want in someone.
And I was reading a book the other day. It was just about relationships in general, um, family relationships, friendships, all of that. And it was saying that a lot of times when people come out of bad situations, they spend time thinking, I hope something happens to them, or I hope they realize what they did to me. I hope, all of these things directed toward that other person. And it's like you can't send your energy there. Just keep your energy for yourself and bettering your life and moving on and moving forward rather than hoping that this person will realize one day how good I was to them.
Yeah, because they probably won't. So don't put your energy in it.
Well, I want to thank you so much for all of your advice and answering these questions. I did want to ask you, had mentioned you do coaching, you have a website. Can you share some of that information?
Yeah, totally. So my website is renovateyourrelationships.com. And you can follow me over on Instagram. My handle is Reno Your Relationships. And I offer personalized one-to-one coaching. And then I also have a self-paced course called Renovate Your Foundations. And that really is a very deep, thorough dive into all things attachment theory and helping you understand your own attachment style, and learning better communication skills and self regulation and self soothing skills. And yeah, so if that was something that piqued your interest from this episode, definitely go check that out, and come say hi to me over on Instagram.